Okay, so now we've gotten to the point where we're going to solve using the quadratic formula. So what does the quadratic formula look like? Well, it looks a little bit like this. X equals, and I always say opposite b, plus and minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. Now this guy underneath the square root is actually really important. This is what we call the discriminant, and it tells us a lot about a quadratic. Let's continue. We'll talk about that later on. Okay, so all divided by 2a. Okay, great. So where does this come from? Well, this comes from the fact that we have a quadratic in what's called standard form. Ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Well, if you look at the quadratic that we're given here, this is not in standard form. So we're going to have to make it look like standard form. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to take the quadratic, and all I need to do is move the 3 to the other side. So a lot of times people will tell you when you've got a quadratic, you're obsessed with getting it equal to 0, and that's exactly what we're going to do. So 2x squared plus 12x plus 3 equals 0. Great. Now that I've got this in this form, I can say a equals 2, b equals 12, and c equals 3. Notice I did not say a equals 2x squared. I did not say b equals 12x. No. A, b, and c are the coefficients. We do not include the x squared or x term along with this. Okay? So just keep that in mind. So now we've got x equals. Now opposite b. So what's b? It's 12. So what's opposite b? Opposite b is negative 12. All right, so we've got negative 12 plus and minus the square root. So we've got 12 squared minus 4 times 2 times 3 from here, 4ac. All divided by 2a. So that's 2 times 2. All right, there we go. So now let's just simplify this and clean it up a little bit more. This is negative 12 plus and minus. This is the square root of 144 minus 4 times 2 is 8 times 3, 24, all divided by 4. Okay, great. Now we've got something that we just need to break down a little bit more. So this isn't terribly bad. Let's see here, negative 12 plus and minus the square root of 144 minus 24 is 120, and then all divided by 4. Okay, now what we need to do is break up 120 in terms of perfect squares. Well, unfortunately, I don't see anything beyond 4 times 30 because 30 has no perfect squares inside of it. But 4 goes into 120. We know that for sure. So let's write that out. So we've got negative 12 plus and minus the square root of 4 times the square root of 30 divided by 4. Okay? And we end up with negative 12 plus and minus 2 square root of 30, all divided again by 4. Now, to further clean this up, all we have to do is reduce this by this 4 factor. So we can say, well, what is negative 12 over 4, 2 out of 4? What can we factor out from there? Well, we can divide out 2 from everything. So if I divide this by 2, I get negative 6. I divide this by 2, I get 1. So that's just going to leave me with plus and minus the square root of 30. And divide this by 2, and I get 2. So this right here is what x would equal. All right, if I were to solve my quadratic equation using the quadratic formula for this guy that I started off with way up here, this would be the answer.